What if time, as we measure it, as we divide it into hours and days and seasons, began not with written language, not with agriculture, not with civilization as we know it, but in the hands of people we have been taught to think of as primitive? What if the first calendar was not carved into stone in Mesopotamia 5,000 years ago, but etched into bone in the flickering light of a cave 40,000 years before that? What if our ancestors, whom we imagine huddled against the dark, afraid and unknowing, were instead watching the sky with a precision that would not be matched again for tens of thousands of years? There is a bone, small, unassuming, brown with age. It was found in a cave in the mountains of what is now Swabia, Germany, pulled from layers of earth that remember the last ice age. The bone is from a cave bear, an animal that has been extinct for longer than recorded history has existed. But it is not the bone itself that matters. It is what someone did to it. 28 tiny marks, deliberate and evenly spaced, carved with a tool sharper than stone should allow. 28 marks, the exact number of days in a lunar month, the exact number of nights it takes for the moon to complete its journey from darkness to fullness and back again. If you find this mystery compelling, if you are drawn to the kind of history that sleeps between myth and archaeology, consider subscribing. Not because I ask, but because you are already here, already listening. And tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Are you in a city, surrounded by electric light that drowns the stars? Or somewhere quieter, where the moon still matters? This bone is 40,000 years old. It predates the pyramids by 35,000 years. It predates Stonehenge, the Sumerian king list, the invention of writing, the domestication of wheat. It predates everything we have been taught to call the beginning of human cleverness. And yet, someone held this bone. Someone looked up at the sky, night after night, and counted. They noticed that the moon returned, that it followed a pattern, that time itself could be captured, could be marked, could be remembered. They were not writing yet. They were not farming. They were not building cities or forging metal. But they were doing something else. They were measuring eternity. For a long time, archaeologists did not see it. The bone was catalogued, stored, forgotten. When it was finally examined closely, the marks were dismissed as decorative, as random scratches, as the idle work of hands with nothing better to do. But then someone counted them. 28. And they counted them again. Still 28. And they looked at other bones, from other sites, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years. And they found the same thing. 28 marks. 29. 30. Always clustering around the lunar month. Always too precise to be accident, too consistent to be decoration. This is not the only bone. In a cave in France, another was found. 30 notches, grouped in fives. In Africa, on the shores of a long dry lake, a piece of ochre with 29 deliberate incisions. In Siberia, in Spain, in the Czech Republic, the same pattern emerges from the earth like a whisper that has been waiting to be heard. Different people, different cultures, different epochs, all doing the same thing. All watching the moon. All counting. Why the moon? Why not the sun, which is brighter, more constant, more obviously the source of warmth and life? Perhaps because the moon changes. It is a clock written in light and shadow, visible to anyone, anywhere, who looks up. It does not require instruments or mathematics or literacy. It simply is. And it repeats. Every 28 days, give or take, the cycle completes. A woman's body knows this rhythm. The tides know it. The animals know it. And so, it seems, did we. But if they were counting the moon, what were they counting for? There were no crops to plant. No harvests to time. No religious festivals to observe. No kings to pay taxes to. No written records to keep. So why count at all? Why take the time, the effort, the focused attention required to carve 28 marks into bone with nothing but stone and patience? What need did they have for a calendar? Perhaps it was not need. Perhaps it was something else. Curiosity, wonder, the same impulse that makes us name the stars, that makes us ask where we came from, that makes us listen to a voice in the dark telling stories about bones and time. Perhaps they were counting because they could, because they had noticed something about the world that was true, and they wanted to remember it, to mark it down, To say, I was here and I saw this and it mattered. Or perhaps there was a reason we can no longer see. A reason buried with them, lost in the unimaginable gulf of time that separates us from the people who made these marks. What did they know that we have forgotten? What were they preparing for? What were they trying to understand? The bone sits in a museum now behind glass, under lights that never flicker. Tourists walk past it without looking. Scholars argue over it in journals no one reads. But the marks remain. 28. Silent, patient, waiting for us to remember why they were made. There is a problem with the story we tell ourselves about human progress. We say that civilization began in Mesopotamia, that writing was invented in Sumer, that agriculture started in the Fertile Crescent around 10,000 years ago. We say that before that, humans were hunter-gatherers, nomadic, surviving but not thriving, living day to day with no thought for tomorrow. We say that the leap from survival to civilization was sudden, almost miraculous, that it happened in a narrow window of time and a narrow strip of land. But the bones say otherwise. The bones, scattered across continents, pulled from caves and riverbanks and forgotten hillsides, tell a different story. They say that long before Sumer, long before agriculture, long before anything we recognize as civilization, humans were already thinking in patterns, already abstracting time, already building systems of knowledge that required memory, precision, and collaboration across generations. They were not writing it down, not yet, but they were doing something equally profound. They were externalizing their minds. They were making the invisible visible. Look at the Lubombo bone, found in a cave in the mountains between South Africa and Swaziland. 43,000 years old, 29 notches, deliberately carved. Or the Ishango bone, from the shores of Lake Edward in the Democratic Republic of Congo. 25,000 years old. 3 columns of marks, grouped in ways that suggest not just counting but arithmetic. Patterns within patterns. Numbers that are not random but chosen. Prime numbers, multiples, additions. Some archaeologists see only tallies. A hunter counting kills, a mother counting children, a traveler counting days. But others see something more. They see the beginning of mathematics, not in the abstract, symbolic form we recognize today, but in the concrete, physical act of marking and comparing and grouping. They see the first tentative steps toward algebra, toward geometry, toward the idea that numbers exist independently of the things they count. That 5 is not just 5 antelope, but 5 itself. An abstraction, a thought made solid. And they see calendars. Not calendars as we know them, with printed months and weekends and holidays, but calendars nonetheless. Lunar calendars. Seasonal markers. Ways of knowing when to move, when to hunt, when to gather, when to prepare. Ways of passing that knowledge down, from one generation to the next, without language sophisticated enough to explain it. The bone becomes the teacher. The marks become the lesson. But why does this unsettle us? Why is it so hard to accept that our ancestors, 40,000 years ago, were capable of this? Perhaps because it forces us to reconsider what it means to be civilized. We have built our entire understanding of history on the idea that progress is linear, that we started simple and became complex, that each generation built on the last, accumulating knowledge until we arrived, finally, at the pinnacle of human achievement. Us. But if people 40,000 years ago were already thinking in abstractions, already measuring time, already creating systems of knowledge, then what does that make us? Not the pinnacle, just the latest iteration. Or perhaps it unsettles us because it suggests that we have lost something, that the people who made these marks knew something we do not, that they had a relationship with time, with the sky, with the rhythms of the natural world that we have traded away for clocks and calendars and screens. That they could look at the moon and see not just light, but information. Not just beauty, but meaning. There is another bone. This one was found in the Dordogne region of France, in a rock shelter overlooking a river that has been flowing since before humans walked upright. The bone is from a reindeer. It is 32,000 years old, and it is covered in marks. Not 28 this time, not 29, but hundreds, thousands. Grouped and spaced and layered in ways that suggest not a single month but many. A year, maybe more. The archaeologist who studied it spent decades counting and lived or died. But it would be there, watching, cycling, marking time whether you were there to see it or not. And maybe that was comforting. Maybe that was important. Or maybe it was practical. Maybe the moon was simply the easiest way to measure time when you had no clocks, no calendars, no written records. A month is long enough to matter but short enough to remember. It is a unit of time that fits the human scale. Not too fast, like a day, which is over before you can plan. Not too slow, like a year, which requires abstract thinking and long-term memory. A month is just right. You can see it happen. You can feel it. You can use it. But this raises another question. If people 40,000 years ago were measuring time in months, were they also measuring it in years? Were they tracking the solstices, the equinoxes, the slow progression of the seasons? Some of the bones suggest they were. The Blanchard bone, from France with its thousands of marks, seems to track not just months but a full solar year. Other artifacts, from other sites, show similar patterns. Marks that cluster in groups of 12 or 13, the number of lunar months in a solar year. Marks that align with the changing position of the sun on the horizon, with the lengthening and shortening of the days. This is profound. This is not just counting moons. This is understanding the relationship between the moon and the sun, between the lunar cycle and the solar cycle. This is recognizing that time is not one thing but many things, nested and overlapping, each with its own rhythm, its own pattern. This is the beginning of astronomy. Not as a science, not yet, but as an art. Practice. A way of being in the world that requires patience and attention and memory. And it is not just the bones. There are stones. Megaliths, circles and alignments and standing stones placed with such precision that they mark the solstices, the equinoxes, the rising and setting of specific stars. We know about Stonehenge, about Newgrange, about the great monuments of the Neolithic. But there are others older, less famous. Göbekli Tepe, in Turkey, 11,000 years old, covered in carvings of animals and symbols that some believe are astronomical. Nabta Playa, in Egypt, 7,000 years old, a stone circle aligned to the summer solstice and certain stars. And before these, perhaps others, lost to time, eroded by wind and rain and the endless gnawing of millennia. The pattern is clear. Humans, for as long as we have been recognizably human, have been obsessed with time. With measuring it. With marking it. With understanding it. This is not a recent development. This is not something that began with civilization. This is older, deeper, more fundamental. What does it mean to measure time before you need to? Before there are crops to plant or taxes to collect or prayers to schedule? What does it mean to count the days when every day is, in theory, the same? Wake, hunt, gather, eat, sleep, survive, repeat. Why complicate that with calendars, with systems, with the careful, painstaking work of tracking celestial cycles that have no immediate, obvious impact on whether you live or die? Unless they do have an impact. Unless knowing when the herds will migrate, when the fish will spawn, when the fruits will ripen, when the first snows will come, is the difference between feast and famine, between life and death. Unless the people we think of as living day to day were actually thinking months, years, even generations ahead. Unless they understood, in a way we have forgotten, that survival is not about the moment but about the pattern. The cycle. The return. There is evidence, subtle but undeniable, that ancient humans were tracking not just the moon, but the seasons. Bones and stones with marks that align not with lunar months but with solar events. Notches that correspond to the number of days between solstices. Patterns that suggest they knew when winter would come, when it would end, when the long, life-giving days of summer would begin. This is not written down. There are no texts to explain it, no instruction manuals, no legends that explicitly say, "We marked the solstice here." But the marks are there. The alignments are there. The patterns are there. And they are too consistent, too precise to be anything but intentional. In what is now Germany, archaeologists found a series of wooden posts, excavated from the remains of a Mesolithic settlement that dates back 10,000 years. The posts were arranged in a line, and when researchers mapped their positions relative to the horizon, they discovered something remarkable. The line pointed directly at the spot where the sun rises on the winter solstice. Not approximately. Exactly. The margin of error is less than a single degree. This was not accident. This was design. Someone, 10,000 years ago, knew exactly where the sun would rise on the shortest day of the year. And they marked it. They built something to remember it. Why? What does the winter solstice mean to a hunter-gatherer? It is the turning point, the moment when the days stop shrinking and start growing again. The promise, whispered in the angle of light, that winter will end, that the sun will return, that life will continue. For people living on the edge of survival, in a world where winter could mean death, that promise mattered. It was not symbolic. It was hope made visible, a reason to endure. But to know when the solstice would come, to predict it accurately enough to build monuments aligned to it, requires more than casual observation. It requires systematic tracking over years. It requires noticing that the sun does not rise in the same place every day, that its position shifts along the horizon, creeping north in summer, south in winter, reaching its extremes on the solstices and its midpoints on the equinoxes. And then it requires remembering those positions, marking them, and passing that knowledge down so that future generations can know when to expect the turn. This is not simple. This is sophisticated. This is the work of minds that were not primitive, not limited, not struggling just to survive. These were minds that had the capacity, the curiosity, and the time to study the heavens, to see patterns that take years to complete, to build knowledge that spans generations. And they were doing this not 5,000 years ago, not 10,000, but much, much earlier. The bones with seasonal markers, the alignments to solstices, the evidence of long-term celestial observation, all of it reaches back into the Paleolithic, into the Ice Age, into the deep time when we are told humans were too busy surviving to think about anything else. But they were thinking, they were watching, they were counting. And what they counted, what they marked, what they remembered was not random. It was not decoration. It was not art for art's sake. It was information. It was knowledge. It was a calendar. Consider what a calendar is at its most fundamental level. It is a way of organizing time, of dividing the endless, formless flow of moments into manageable units. Days, months, years. It is a way of predicting the future based on the patterns of the past. A way of saying this happened before and it will happen again and we can prepare. It is one of the most powerful tools humans have ever created because it allows us to think beyond the immediate, to plan, to anticipate, to control in some small way our fate. And we have been doing it for 40,000 years, maybe longer. The marks on bones are only what has survived. How many other calendars were kept in wood, in bark, in sand, in memory? How many systems of timekeeping existed that left no trace for us to find? How much knowledge was passed down orally generation after generation before it was finally forgotten when the world changed and the old ways were no longer needed? We will never know. The deep past is silent on so many things, but the bones speak, and what they say is that we have been human, fully human, in all the ways that matter, for far longer than we have been willing to admit. That the capacity for abstract thought, for systematic observation, for long-term planning, for creating and transmitting knowledge, is not a recent acquisition. It is ancient. It is fundamental. It is what we are. Look at yourself in the mirror. Look at your hands. Those hands are the same hands that carved marks into bone 40,000 years ago. The same brain that watches the sky tonight is the same brain that watched it then. We have not changed, not in any meaningful biological sense. We have simply accumulated more knowledge, more tools, more technology. But the core, the essence, the part of us that looks at the cosmos and asks why, that part is unchanged. Ancient. Eternal. There is something unsettling about finding complexity where we expected simplicity. We are comfortable with the narrative of progress, the idea that we started primitive and became sophisticated, that our ancestors were less than us in every way that matters. But the calendars carved into bone tell a different story. They tell us that sophistication is not new, that the ability to think abstractly, to observe systematically, to create and maintain complex systems of knowledge, has been with us for as long as we have been us. And this raises uncomfortable questions. If our ancestors 40,000 years ago were capable of creating lunar calendars, of tracking seasonal cycles, there was complexity, sophistication, and knowledge in the deep past. That the people who lived then were not less than us. They were us, separated by time but not by capacity. And if that is true, if human potential has been constant for 40,000 years or more, then what we are today is not the pinnacle of evolution but simply the latest expression of something ancient. We have not become more intelligent. We have not evolved new capabilities. We have simply built on the knowledge accumulated by every generation that came before. We stand on the shoulders of giants who carved calendars into bone and watched the moon and knew, as we know, that time passes and patterns repeat and the universe, for all its vastness and mystery, can be understood. At least in part. At least enough to mark it, to count it, to remember. What were they counting toward? What were they counting for? These are the questions that haunt the bones, the silent marks that offer no explanation, only evidence. We know they were counting. We know they were watching the sky. We know they understood cycles, patterns, the mathematics of celestial motion. But we do not know why. We do not know what purpose drove them to spend precious time. In an age when every moment mattered for survival, carving notches into bone and aligning stones to solstices. Perhaps the answer is that we are asking the wrong question. Perhaps there was no single purpose. Perhaps, like us, they had many reasons for many things. Some practical, some spiritual, some simply born of curiosity, of the restless human need to understand, to make sense, to impose order on chaos. The practical reasons are easy to imagine. Knowing when the herds would migrate, when the salmon would run, when the nuts would ripen, when the first frost would come, all of these could mean the difference between abundance and starvation. A calendar, even a simple one, gives you an edge. It lets you prepare. It lets you plan. It turns the chaotic, unpredictable world into something manageable, something you can anticipate and respond to. In that sense, a calendar is a survival tool, as important as a spear or a fire. But it is more than that. It is also a way of organizing society. A calendar allows coordination. It allows multiple groups, spread across a landscape, to come together at specific times for specific purposes. Trade, ritual, marriage, storytelling, the transmission of knowledge. Without a shared sense of when things will happen, coordination is impossible. But with a calendar, even a simple one based on lunar cycles, you can say, "Meet me at this place when the moon is full," and everyone knows when that is. Everyone can plan for it. Everyone can be there. And perhaps that is part of what the calendars were for. Not just survival, but community. The creation of a shared temporal framework that allowed people to come together, to cooperate, to build something larger than themselves. A calendar is not just a tool. It is a social contract. An agreement about how time works, about what matters, about when we will be together and what we will do. But there is another possibility, one that is harder to quantify but perhaps more important. Perhaps they were counting because it connected them to something larger. Because watching the sky, tracking the moon, understanding the cycles of the cosmos, made them feel part of it. Made them feel that they were not random, not accidental, not meaningless. That they existed within a pattern, a grand design, that they could perceive even if they could not fully understand it. This is the spiritual dimension of calendars. The reason why, across cultures and across time, the measurement of time has always been intertwined with religion, with ritual, with the sacred. The solstices and equinoxes are not just astronomical events. They are moments of power, moments when the world changes, when light and dark balance or tip toward one extreme or the other. To mark those moments, to know when they will come, to gather and celebrate them, is to participate in the cosmic order. To say, "We see you, we understand, we are part of this." And perhaps that is what the people who carved calendars into bone were doing. Not just surviving, not just coordinating, but reaching out, across the vastness of space and time, to touch something eternal. To connect with the cosmos in the only way available to them, through observation, through pattern recognition, through the careful, patient work of counting. Think about what that means. Think about standing in the cold, in the dark, night after night, watching the moon, marking its phases, Counting. Not because someone told you to, but because you chose to, because you wanted to, because it mattered to you. What kind of mind does that? What kind of soul? It is the same mind, the same soul, that builds cathedrals and writes symphonies and launches spacecraft to the edge of the solar system. It is the human mind in its purest form. Curious, persistent, hungry for meaning, refusing to accept that the universe is random, that existence is purposeless, that we are here for no reason. The people who carved calendars into bone 40,000 years ago were not primitive. They were us. They were asking the same questions we ask, seeking the same answers, reaching for the same transcendence. And they found it in their own way, in the rhythm of the moon, in the turning of the seasons, in the knowledge that time passes but patterns remain, that the universe is not chaos but order, that there is something to understand, something to connect with, something larger than ourselves. We have lost that to some extent. We have clocks that tell us the time down to the microsecond, calendars that synchronize across the globe, systems that make timekeeping automatic and invisible. We do not need to watch the sky anymore. We do not need to count. The machines do it for us. And in doing so, we have become disconnected from the very thing we are measuring. Time has become abstract, mechanical, divorced from the natural world. We know what time it is, but we do not know where we are in the cosmic cycle. We do not feel the turning of the earth, the dance of the moon, the slow wheel of the seasons. But they did. The people who carved calendars into bone felt it. They knew it. They lived it. And perhaps that is what we have lost. Not knowledge, but connection. Not sophistication, but intimacy. We know more than they did about how the universe works, about the mechanics of celestial motion, about the physics of time itself. But do we feel it the way they did? Do we watch the sky with the same attention, the same reverence, the same sense that we are witnessing something profound? Or have we traded wonder for convenience, connection for control, the lived experience of time for the abstraction of clocks? These are not easy questions, and they do not have clear answers, but they are worth asking, because the bones, with their silent marks, remind us of something important. They remind us that our ancestors, despite having none of our technology, despite living in a world we would find unbearably harsh, were not impoverished. They had something we risk losing, a relationship with time, a connection to the cosmos, a sense that their lives, brief as they were, mattered within the grand pattern of existence. And perhaps that is the real lesson of the ancient calendars. Not that we should abandon our clocks and return to watching the moon, but that we should remember what time is. Not an abstraction, not a resource to be managed, but a rhythm, a cycle, pattern we are part of, something to be felt, not just measured, something to connect with, not just track. The more we look, the more we find. Every year, it seems, archaeologists unearth another bone, another stone, another artifact with marks that suggest counting, tracking, measuring. And every time, the dates get pushed back. What we thought was the oldest calendar is replaced by something older still. The timeline of human sophistication stretches further and further into the past, until it reaches a point where we can no longer dismiss it as an anomaly, as an exception, as a few isolated geniuses among otherwise primitive people. No, this was widespread. This was consistent. This was, in some fundamental sense, universal. Everywhere humans went, they looked up. They counted. They marked. They remembered. From Europe to Africa to Asia to Australia to the Americas, the pattern repeats. Different methods, different materials, different levels of precision, but the same basic impulse. The same fundamental act. The measurement of time. Why is this important? Why does it matter that our ancestors had calendars 40,000 years ago instead of 5,000? What difference does it make to us, here, now, living in a world where we can check the time on our phones and the date on our screens without ever looking at the sky? It matters because it changes the story we tell about ourselves, about who we are and where we come from. For too long, we have told a story of linear progress, of steady ascent from ignorance to knowledge, from savagery to civilization. We have imagined our ancestors as less than us, as proto-humans struggling to become what we are now. And that story is comforting in a way. It makes us feel special, advanced, the pinnacle of that would make their motivations obvious. Consider this. We assume that calendars are practical tools, meant to organize life, to coordinate activity, to manage resources. And they are that, certainly. But they are also something more. They are a way of imposing order on time, of taking something that is fundamentally chaotic and making it predictable. And in doing so, they give us control. Or at least the illusion of control. We cannot stop time. We cannot reverse it. But we can measure it. We can divide it. We can name its pieces and assign them meaning. And that, in itself, is a profound act of power. Perhaps that is what the ancient calendars were really about. Not just knowing when things would happen, but asserting control over the flow of existence. Saying, time is not just something that happens to us. It is something we can understand, mark, remember. It is something we can master, at least symbolically. This interpretation is supported by the fact that, across cultures and across time, calendars have always been closely linked to power, to kingship, to priesthood, to authority. The people who control the calendar control society, because they control the framework within which everyone else operates. They decide when festivals occur, when debts are due, when seasons begin. They are the gatekeepers of time itself. And that is a tremendous source of power. Could this have been true even in the Paleolithic? Could the people who created the first calendars have been seeking not just knowledge, but authority? Were they shamans, using their understanding of celestial cycles to position themselves as intermediaries between the human world and the cosmic order? Did they leverage their ability to predict the solstice, the full moon, the coming of spring, to gain influence, to command respect, to shape their communities? We do not know. But it is possible. Power is as old as humanity. And knowledge has always been power. Or perhaps we are overthinking it. Perhaps the calendars were not about survival or ritual or power, but about something simpler and more profound. Perhaps they were about meaning. About the need to feel that life is not random, that existence has structure, that we are part of something larger than ourselves. A calendar, after all, is a way of connecting the human scale of experience to the cosmic scale of celestial motion. It says, your life, brief as it is linked to the eternal cycles of the universe. You are part of the pattern. You belong. And maybe that is what they were seeking. Not control, not power, but connection. A sense of place within the vastness of space and time. A way of saying, I am here, I am now, and I matter because I am part of this grand design. If that is true, then the ancient calendars are not just scientific instruments or practical tools. They are existential statements. They are philosophical declarations. They are, in the most literal sense, answers to the question, what is my place in the universe? And the answer they offer is, you are part of the pattern. You are connected to the cosmos. You are not alone. This is why the discovery of ancient calendars is so important. Not just because it pushes back the timeline of human sophistication, though it does that. Not just because it challenges our assumptions about the capabilities of our ancestors, though it does that too. But because it reveals something fundamental about what it means to be human. We are the species that measures time, that watches the sky, that seeks patterns in chaos and meaning in randomness. We are the species that refuses to accept the world as it appears, that insists on looking deeper, asking why, trying to understand. And we have been doing this for at least 40,000 years. Probably longer. The marks on bones are only what has survived. How much more has been lost? How many other calendars, carved into wood or bark or hide, have rotted away, leaving no trace? How many systems of knowledge were maintained orally, passed down in songs and stories, until the culture that kept them died out and the knowledge died with them? We will never know the full extent of what has been lost, but we can appreciate what has survived. The bones with their careful marks, the stones aligned to solstices, the patterns that repeat across continents and millennia. These are the remnants of something vast, something ancient, something that connected people across time and space in a shared project of understanding. And we are part of that project still. When we look at the moon and note its phase, when we mark the solstice, When we consult a calendar to plan our lives, we are doing what our ancestors did. We are participating in the same ancient practice. We are continuing the tradition that began when someone, somewhere 40,000 years ago or more, looked at the sky and decided to count. The tools have changed. The methods have changed. But the impulse remains the same. The need to measure time, to understand it, to connect with the rhythms of the cosmos. This is not something civilization invented. This is something civilization inherited. And it is older, far older than we have been willing to admit. So when you see the marks on a bone, 28 notches carved into the surface of a cave bear femur pulled from Ice Age sediment, do not think of them as primitive. Do not think of them as the crude beginnings of something that would later become sophisticated. Think of them as what they are, evidence of a fully human mind, engaged in a fully human activity. Counting, measuring, understanding, connecting. Think of them as a message. Not to us specifically, but to the future, whoever that future might be. A message that says, we were here, we were watching, we understood. We counted the moon, and the moon counted our days, and we knew that we were part of something larger, something eternal, something that would continue long after we were gone. And it has. The moon still turns, the seasons still change, the solstices still come, and we still watch, we still count, we still seek meaning in the patterns of the sky. 40,000 years and we have not changed, not in the ways that matter. There is an epilogue to this story, though it is not really an ending. It is more of an opening, a door that swings wider the more we look through it. Because the calendars carved into bone are not isolated artifacts. They are part of a larger pattern, a broader constellation of evidence that suggests our understanding of prehistory is not just incomplete but fundamentally flawed. We have been taught to think of the Stone Age as a time of simplicity, of people living in small, isolated bands, struggling to survive, possessing little knowledge and less culture. But the calendars tell a different story. They tell us that even in the deepest reaches of prehistory, people were engaged in activities that required abstract thinking, long-term planning, systematic observation, and the transmission of complex knowledge across generations. They tell us that culture, in its fullest sense, is not a recent development but an ancient inheritance. And the calendars are not alone. There is other evidence, scattered and fragmentary but undeniable, that points to the same conclusion. The cave paintings of Lascaux and Altamira, created 30,000 years ago, demonstrate not just artistic skill but symbolic thinking, the ability to represent reality in abstract form. The Venus figurines, carved from mammoth ivory and stone, found across Europe and dating back 30,000 years, suggest shared artistic traditions and possibly shared beliefs that spanned vast distances. The sophisticated stone tools, the elaborate burials, the long-distance trade networks that brought exotic materials hundreds of miles from their source. All of these point to cultures that were rich, complex, and deeply human. We have not given them credit. We have not imagined them fully. We have looked at their artifacts and seen simplicity because we expected simplicity. But the more we look, the more complexity we find. And at some point we have to ask, what else are we missing? What else have we failed to see because we were not looking for it? Consider language. We know that modern humans have had the capacity for complex, symbolic language for at least 50,000 years, possibly much longer. We know this from the structure of the skull, the shape of the vocal apparatus, the size and organization of the brain. But we do not know when language actually developed, when it became the rich, flexible, infinitely expressive tool it is today. We assume it was gradual, that it evolved slowly over tens of thousands of years. But what if it was not? What if language, in its full complexity, is much older than we think? What if the people who carved calendars into bone were speaking to each other with the same nuance, the same depth, the same capacity for abstract expression that we have today? We cannot know for certain. Language does not fossilize. It leaves no direct trace. But the indirect evidence, the cultural artifacts, the symbolic thinking, the coordinated activities that require communication, all of these suggest that complex language has been with us for a very, very long time. And if that is true, then what stories were they telling? What knowledge were they sharing? What ideas were they debating around fires that have long since turned to ash? We will never hear those conversations, but we can imagine them. We can look at the calendars and the paintings, systems and symbols and stories that allow us to share our understanding of time with others, to pass it down through generations, to make it something that exists outside our individual experience. This is abstraction. This is culture. This is what separates human time from biological time. And it is ancient, at least 40,000 years old, based on the evidence we have. Possibly older. Possibly as old as humanity itself. What does it mean that we have been doing this for so long? What does it tell us about ourselves, about our nature, about what drives us? It tells us that we are meaning-making creatures, that we cannot simply exist in the moment. We need context. We need to know where we are in the flow of time, how we fit into the pattern, what comes before and what comes after. We need to feel that our lives, brief as they are, matter within some larger framework. And time, measured and marked and understood, gives us that framework. But it also tells us something else. It tells us that we are creatures of memory and anticipation, that we live not just in the present but in the past and future simultaneously. We remember what has been, and that memory shapes how we understand now. We anticipate what will be, and that anticipation shapes what we do. The calendar is the tool that makes this possible. It allows us to look backward and forward, to see patterns in what has happened and use those patterns to predict what will happen. It turns time from a mystery into a map. And perhaps this is why the ancient calendars are so moving, because they show us that this fundamental human activity, this engagement with time, this need to understand and measure and predict, is not new. It is not a product of civilization or literacy or modernity. It is something we have always done. Something we have been doing since before we built cities, before we planted crops, before we wrote a single word. It is, in the most profound sense, part of what we are. But there is also sadness in the calendars, because they remind us of what has been lost. 40,000 years is a long time, long enough for countless cultures to rise and fall, for entire ways of life to flourish and vanish, for knowledge to be gained and forgotten and gained again. And most of it left no trace. Most of it is gone forever, dissolved into the silence of the deep past. The calendars that survive are the exceptions. The rare instances where something permanent was created, where marks were made in material that could endure. But for every bone that survives, how many were lost? For every calendar that made it to a museum, how many rotted in the earth, were scattered by animals, were worn away by time? And for every physical calendar, how many more existed only in memory, in oral tradition, in knowledge that was passed down until the chain was broken and the knowledge died? We will never know. The past does not give up its secrets easily. But we can stand in awe of what remains. We can look at 28 marks on a bone and recognize them for what they are. A miracle of preservation. A message that survived against all odds. A link, fragile but unbroken, connecting us to people who lived unimaginably long ago. And we can honor them, not with monuments or rituals, though those have their place, but by continuing what they began, by watching the sky, by counting, by seeking to understand the patterns of existence, by passing down knowledge to the next generation as they did, so that the chain is not broken, so that the conversation with time continues. This is the true legacy of the ancient calendars. Not the specific knowledge they contain, though that is valuable, but the example they set, the proof they offer that humans, as long as we have been humans, have been engaged in this project. This grand, collective, multi-generational project of trying to understand the universe and our place within it. We are still engaged in that project. We still watch the sky, though now with telescopes and satellites. We still measure time, though now with atomic clocks that lose less than a second in millions of years. We still seek patterns, though now with supercomputers analyzing vast datasets. The scale has changed. The tools have changed. But the impulse remains. We are them. They are us. Separated by 40,000 years, but united in purpose. And so, as you lie in the dark tonight, listening to this voice tell stories about bones and time, consider this. You are part of a tradition that stretches back further than you can imagine. A tradition of curiosity and persistence and wonder. A tradition that began when someone, somewhere, looked at the moon and decided to count. And that tradition will continue long after you are gone, as long as there are humans to carry it forward. The calendars carved into bone are not relics. They are not curiosities. They are not even really artifacts. They are mirrors, reflections of ourselves, thrown back from the deep past. When we look at them, we do not see primitive scratches made by primitive people. We see intelligence, intention, understanding. We see humanity in its fullest form, engaged in the fundamental human act of making sense of existence. And in seeing that, we see ourselves, not as we imagine ourselves, but as we truly are. Not separate from the past, but continuous with it. Not the end of history, but part of its flow. Connected, across the vast gulf of time, to everyone who has ever looked at the sky and wondered. 40,000 years ago, someone carved 28 marks into a bone. They did not know that we would find it. They did not know that we would argue about it, study it, try to understand what it meant. They simply counted. They watched the moon and they counted and they marked down what they saw. And here we are, 40,000 years later, still counting, still watching, still seeking to understand. The moon still turns. The cycle continues. And we, like our ancestors before us, are part of the pattern. There is a question we have not yet asked, but perhaps should. What happens when we stop counting? What happens when the connection between humans and the rhythms of the cosmos is severed? When time becomes something we no longer feel but only measure mechanically? When the sky no longer matters because we have electric light to replace the moon and central heating to defy the seasons? We are living in that world now. Most of us, anyway. We wake to alarms, not to sunlight. We eat food that comes from anywhere, anytime, disconnected from seasons and harvests. We work under artificial light, in climate-controlled spaces, where the passage of time is marked by digital clocks, not by the changing position of the sun or the phases of the moon. We have achieved something our ancestors could not have imagined. We have made ourselves independent of the natural cycles that governed human life for 40,000 years or more. Is this progress? In many ways, yes. We are not at the mercy of seasons. We do not starve when the harvest fails. We do not freeze when winter comes. We have used our understanding of time, our calendars and clocks and systems, to build a world where we are, to some extent, free from the constraints that bound our ancestors. But we have also lost something. We have lost the intimacy with time that they had. The direct, bodily, lived experience of cycles and patterns. We know intellectually when the solstice is. We can look it up. But do we feel it? Do we notice the changing angle of the light, the lengthening or shortening of days? Do we watch the moon, night by night, as it waxes and wanes? Or do we simply glance at a calendar and move on, trusting that the machine of modern timekeeping will tell us what we need to know? Most of us have chosen the latter, and that is understandable. Modern life is complex, demanding, full of obligations that require precise coordination. We need to know not just what day it is, but what hour, what minute. We need to synchronize with millions of other people across time zones and continents in ways that would be impossible without standardized, mechanized time. The old way, the way of watching the sky and counting moons, is not sufficient for the world we have built. But perhaps we have gone too far. Perhaps, in our rush to master time, to mechanize it, to make it serve our purposes, we have forgotten that time is not just a tool. It is also an experience, a relationship, a way of being in the world. And when we lose that relationship, when we stop feeling the turning of the earth and the cycling of the moon, we lose something essential. Some part of what makes us human. This is not nostalgia. This is not a romantic longing for a simpler past that never really existed. The lives of our Ice Age ancestors were hard, brutal, short. We should not wish to return to that. But we can acknowledge that they had something we do not. A connection to the cosmos. A sense of being part of the pattern. And we can ask whether it is possible to reclaim some of that connection without giving up the benefits of modern life. Perhaps it is. Perhaps all it takes is paying attention. Looking up. Noticing the moon. watching the sun rise and set, marking, in whatever way feels meaningful, the passage of seasons. Not because we need to for survival, but because it connects us to something larger. Because it reminds us that we are not separate from nature. Not genome also carved 28 notches into a cave bare bone and watched the moon, night after night, counting. That intelligence is not new. Curiosity is not new. The capacity for abstract thought, for systematic observation, for long-term planning, none of it is new. It is ancient. It is what we are. And it contains a question. One that we have circled throughout this long meditation but never quite answered. Why? Why did they count? What purpose did it serve? What need did it fill? Perhaps the answer is that there is no single answer. That different people in different places at different times counted for different reasons. Some practical, some spiritual, some simply because they could. Because they had noticed something true about the world and wanted to mark it down, to remember it, to share it. Or perhaps the answer is simpler and more profound than that. Perhaps they counted because we are the species that counts. Because it is in our nature to look at the world and see patterns, to see chaos and impose order, to see the formless flow of time and divide it into meaningful units. Perhaps counting is not something we learn to do. Perhaps it is something we have always done, as natural to us as breathing. If that is true, then the marks on bones are not inventions. They are expressions. They are the external manifestation of an internal drive, a need that is wired into the very structure of the human mind. The need to measure, to understand, to connect. And if that is true, then the ancient calendars are not just artifacts from the past. They are mirrors of the present. They show us not what we were, but what we are. Not how far we have come, but how long we have been traveling. They show us that the journey toward understanding, toward meaning, toward connection with the cosmos, is not something that begins or ends. It simply is. It has always been. It will always be. As long as there are humans to look at the sky and ask why. This is both humbling and exhilarating. Humbling because it means we are not as special as we thought. Not the pinnacle of evolution. Not the first truly intelligent beings. Not the inventors of civilization. We are simply the latest iteration, standing on the shoulders of countless generations who came before, who did the same work we do, who asked the same questions, who sought the same understanding. But it is also exhilarating, because it means we are part of something vast, something ancient, something that transcends the individual, the culture, the era. We are part of a project that began before we were born and will continue after we die. A project that connects every human who has ever lived, across all of time and space, in a shared pursuit of meaning. And that is beautiful. That is profound. That is, in the deepest sense, what makes life worth living. The marks on bones tell us this. They whisper it across the void of 40,000 years. They say, you are not alone. You are not the first to wonder. You are not the first to look at the moon and try to understand. Others came before you. They watched. They counted. They carved their knowledge into bone so that it might survive. And it has. It has survived long enough to reach you, to tell you that the questions you ask, the wonder you feel, the need you have to understand, these are ancient. These are human. These are eternal. And what will you do with this knowledge? How will you respond to this message from the deep past? Perhaps you will do what they did. Perhaps you will look up. Perhaps you will find the moon, hanging in the night sky, and watch it. Perhaps you will count its phases, not on paper or in an app, but in your mind or in marks of your own. Perhaps you will reconnect in some small way with the tradition that began so long ago. Perhaps you will become part of the pattern. Or perhaps you will simply listen. Perhaps you will lie in the dark as you are now and let these words wash over you and let yourself feel the vastness of time, the continuity of human experience, the connection that links you to people you will never meet but who are, in every way that matters, family. Because they were human, and so are you. And that is enough. The bone sits in a museum, behind glass, under lights that never flicker. The marks are still there. 28. Silent, patient, waiting. But they are not waiting for us to solve them. They are not a puzzle that needs an answer. They are simply there. evidence, proof, a message. We were here. We were watching. We understood. And so do you. Look at the moon tonight if you can. Look at it and remember. Remember that 40,000 years ago, someone else looked at the same moon, counted the same phases, carved the same number into bone. Remember that you are part of their story, as they are part of yours. Remember that the tradition continues, that the pattern holds, that the cycle repeats. And in remembering, know that you are not just observing time. You are participating in it. You are part of the pattern, part of the story, part of the eternal human conversation with the cosmos. The moon turns, the seasons change, the solstices come and go, and we, small and brief as we are, watch, we count, we understand. This is what it means to be human. This has always been what it means to be human, and it will always be. 28 marks on a bone, 40,000 years, one moon, one sky, one humanity, reaching across time trying to understand. The marks remain. The pattern continues. The story is not over. It has only just begun. In the end, we are left with silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of fullness. The silence of a story told, a question asked, a mystery acknowledged. The silence that falls when words have done all they can, and what remains is simply to be, to sit with the knowledge, to let it settle, to feel its weight. We have traveled far in this meditation. From a single bone to the edge of human history, from 28 marks to the vast sweep of 40,000 years. We have asked why our ancestors counted, why they watched the sky, why they took the time and effort to measure something as abstract as time itself. And we have found, not a single answer but many answers. Practical, spiritual, existential, all of them true, all of them incomplete. Because the truth is, we cannot fully know what they were thinking. We cannot step into their minds, cannot see the world through their eyes, cannot feel what they felt when they looked at the moon and decided to count. The gulf of time is too vast. The differences in lived experience too profound. They lived in a world we can barely imagine. A world of ice and megafauna and darkness unbroken by electric light. A world where survival was everything. And yet somehow, in the midst of that struggle, they found time to wonder, to observe, to create. And in creating, they left us something. Not just bones with marks, though those are precious, but a legacy, a tradition, a way of being human that has endured for millennia and continues to this day. The tradition of looking up, of asking why, of refusing to accept the world as given and instead seeking to understand it. This is the thread that connects us to them, that makes us part of the same story, the same family, the same species. We are them, they are us. And the work they began, the project of understanding time and our place within it, continues. It continues in every clock we check, every calendar we consult, every moment we pause to notice the moon or mark the changing seasons. It continues in the deep, unspoken rhythm of human consciousness, the awareness that we exist in time, that time flows through us and around us and carries us forward toward an uncertain future. This awareness is both burden and gift. Burden because it means we know we are mortal, that our time is limited, that everything we build, everything we love, everything we are, will one day end. But gift because it means we can choose how to spend that time. We can choose to watch the sky, to seek understanding, to connect with something larger than ourselves. We can choose to participate in the pattern, to add our own marks to the long, long chain of human knowledge and human wonder. The ancient calendars remind us of this choice. They remind us that time is not just something that happens to us. It is something we engage with, something we shape even as it shapes us. And they remind us that this engagement, this relationship with time, is one of the most fundamentally human things we do. It is what makes us who we are. But they also remind us of fragility, of how much has been lost. 40,000 years is a long time, long enough for empires to rise and fall, for species to go extinct, for continents to drift, for ice ages to come and go. And through all of that, most of what our ancestors created, most of what they knew, most of who they were, has vanished. The bones with marks are exceptions. miracles of preservation. Most of their knowledge, their stories, their wisdom is gone forever. This should humble us. It should make us think about what we are leaving behind, about what will survive of our civilization, our culture, our knowledge. Do it? What were they thinking? And we answer as best we can, with theories and analysis and careful reasoning, but also with stories, with imagination, with empathy. We try to see through their eyes, to feel what they felt, to understand not just what they did but why it mattered. And in doing so, we create a bridge, connection across time, a way of honoring them, of acknowledging that they were not just data points in the archaeological record but people, humans, like us. This is what the best history does. Not just record facts, but recreate experience. Not just tell us what happened, but help us feel what it was like. And the ancient calendars, for all their simplicity, for all that they are just marks on bone, have that power. They make us feel the presence of the people who made them. They make us wonder. They make us care. And perhaps that is their greatest legacy. Not the specific knowledge they contain, though that matters. Not the evidence they provide of ancient sophistication, though that is important. But the way they connect us to the past. The way they make us feel part of a larger story. The way they remind us that we are not alone. Not the first, not isolated in our moment of time, but linked, in a chain that stretches back further than we can see, to everyone who has ever lived and wondered and tried to understand. This connection is precious. In a world that often feels fragmented, disconnected, isolated, where we are bombarded with information but starved for meaning, the ancient calendars offer something different. They offer continuity. They offer belonging. They offer the sense that we are part of something that transcends the individual, the moment, the immediate concerns of daily life. They offer perspective. Because when you think about 40,000 years, when you try to wrap your mind around that span of time, the petty concerns of the present start to shrink. The things that seem so important, so urgent, so all-consuming begin to fade. And what remains is the essential, the questions that have always mattered. Who are we? Why are we here? What does it mean to live well, to live meaningfully, in the brief span of time we are given? The people who carved calendars into bone did not have the answers to those questions any more than we do. But they were asking them. They were engaged with them. They were living lives that, for all their differences from ours, were fundamentally similar in the ways that matter. They loved. They feared. They hoped. They wondered. They looked at the sky and tried to understand. And so do we. 40,000 years separate us from them. 40,000 years of change, of development, of progress and regression and everything in between. And yet, in the most important ways, nothing has changed. We are still human, still curious, still trying to make sense of a universe that is vast and strange and beautiful and terrifying. Still carving our own marks, in our own ways, trying to leave something behind that says, we were here, we mattered, we understood at least a little. The moon still turns, the seasons still change, the pattern continues, and we, like our ancestors, are part of it. Brief as our lives are, small as we are in the vastness of space and time, we are part of the story. We contribute our verse, as the poet said. We add our marks to the long, long record of human existence. What will those marks be? What will we leave behind? What will future archaeologists, digging through the ruins of our time, find that speaks to who we were and what we valued? Perhaps they will find technology. Certainly they will find that. We have created so much of it, left so much of it buried in the earth, in the oceans, in orbit around the planet. They will find our machines, our devices, our monuments to progress. And they will learn something from those, about our capabilities, our cleverness, our ambition. But will they find anything that speaks to our wonder, to our curiosity, to our connection with the cosmos? Will they find evidence that we, like our ancestors, watched the sky? That we counted? That we tried to understand? Perhaps they will find this. These words, preserved somehow against the odds. Or perhaps they will find something else. Some other mark, some other attempt to measure time, to make sense of existence, to connect with something larger. Perhaps they will find that, even in our technologically advanced age, we were still doing what humans have always done. Looking up, counting, wondering. And if they find that, they will know that we were human, fully human, and they will recognize themselves in us, just as we recognize ourselves in the people who carved calendars into bone 40,000 years ago. This is the gift of time. Not that it separates us, but that it connects us. Not that it makes us different, but that it reveals how much we are the same. Across millennia, across cultures, across all the changes and developments and revolutions that history brings, the essential core of humanity remains. Curious, creative, reaching always toward understanding. The marks on bones tell us this. And in listening, in letting their message sink in, we become part of the story. We join the long line of humans who have wondered about the past, who have sought connection with those who came before, who have tried to understand what it means to be part of this grand, ongoing, never-ending project of being human. Sleep now if you can. Let the questions rest. Let the mystery remain. Let the moon turn as it always has, as it always will. And know that you are part of the pattern, part of the tradition, part of the story that began 40,000 years ago and continues still. The marks remain. The pattern holds. The story goes on. And you are part of it. And so we come to the end, though it is not really an ending. Because the story of the ancient calendars, the story of humans measuring time, is not a story that ends. It is ongoing, perpetual, woven into the very fabric of what it means to be human. As long as there are people, as long as there is consciousness, as long as there is the capacity to look at the sky and wonder, the story continues. But for now, for tonight, we can let it rest. We can let the questions settle. We can let the marks on bones speak their silent testimony without demanding that they explain themselves fully. We can simply acknowledge them, honor them, and recognize what they represent. Evidence of minds like ours, engaged in the same fundamental project we are still engaged in today. Measuring time, making sense of existence, connecting with the patterns of the cosmos. This is not a modern activity. This is not something civilization invented. This is ancient, primal, human. 40,000 years ago, someone held a bone. They held a tool. And with patience, with intention, with a mind that understood patterns and cycles and the relationship between observation and knowledge, they made marks. 28 of them. One for each night of the moon's journey from darkness to fullness and back. And in making those marks, they did something profound. They took the invisible and made it visible. They took the abstract and made it concrete. They took time, which is the most ephemeral thing there is, and gave it form. This is magic in the truest sense. Not the magic of spells and incantations, but the magic of transformation. The magic of taking something that exists only in experience and making it exist in the world. The magic of creating meaning where before there was only flux. And we do the same thing today. Every time we write down a date, every time we plan for the future, every time we remember the past, we are performing that same act of magic. We are taking time, which flows constantly and cannot be grasped, and we are imposing structure on it. We are making it manageable, understandable, human. This is our gift, our curse, our burden, and our glory. We are the species that knows time passes, that understands we are mortal, that can look forward and backward, can plan and remember, can imagine futures that have not happened and mourn pasts that are gone. No other animal can do this. No other consciousness, as far as we know, carries this weight. But we do. And we have for at least 40,000 years, probably longer, possibly as long as we have been human in the fullest sense of that word. The marks on bones prove this. They prove that our ancestors were not living only in the present, not reacting only to immediate needs, not trapped in the now. They were thinking ahead, planning, remembering. They were conscious of time in the same way we are. They felt its passage. They understood its patterns. They knew that yesterday was gone and tomorrow was coming, and that the moon, faithful and constant, would mark the days between. And knowing this, they counted. They marked. They remembered. And in doing so, they became fully human. Or perhaps they already were, and the counting was simply the evidence of it. The external manifestation of an internal truth. That to be human is to be aware of time. to measure it, to struggle with it, to try in whatever way we can, to hold it, even as it slips through our fingers. This is the final lesson of the ancient calendars. Not that our ancestors were smart, though they were. Not that prehistory was complex, though it was. Not even that we are finding patterns and meaning is ancient. The calendars prove it. 40,000 years ago, our ancestors were already doing what we do today. Looking beyond the surface, seeking understanding, creating systems of knowledge that transcended individual experience. And this should change how we think about ourselves, about our place in history, about what it means to be modern. We are not so different from our ancestors as we like to imagine. We have more technology, yes, more accumulated knowledge, more tools. But the fundamental capacities, the core of what makes us human, has been constant for at least 40,000 years. We are not evolving towards something. We already are what we are. We have been for a very long time. And what we are is this: conscious, curious, creative beings who exist in time, who are aware of time, and who spend our lives trying to make sense of that existence. The ancient calendars are proof of this. They are evidence that the project of being human, of trying to understand and create and connect, is not new. It is ancient, and it will continue as long as we continue. So as you lie here, in the dark, letting these words wash over you, letting your mind drift towards sleep, consider this one last time. You are not alone. You are not the first to wonder about time, about existence, about the meaning of it all. You are part of a conversation that has been ongoing for 40,000 years or more. A conversation that takes place in marks on bones and words in the dark and thoughts in the silent moments before sleep. You are part of that conversation. Your wondering, your questioning, your curiosity about the past and your attempts to understand it, all of this is part of the same ancient tradition. You are continuing what they started. You are honoring them, whether you know it or not, by doing what they did. Paying attention to the world, seeking patterns, trying to understand. And one day, someone will honor you the same way. Someone in the future, looking back at our time, will try to understand what we were thinking, what we valued, what we believed. They will look at what we left behind and try to make sense of it. They will ask the same questions we ask about our ancestors. Why did they do this? What were they thinking? What did it mean? And perhaps they will find, as we have found, that the answer is both simple and profound. We were trying to understand. We were trying to connect. We were trying to make meaning out of existence. We were, in short, being human. This is the legacy we inherit from the ancient calendar makers. And this is the legacy we will pass on. Not specific knowledge, which changes and evolves and is constantly being updated, but the impulse, the drive, the need to look at the world and ask why, to measure time, to seek patterns, to create meaning. This is what makes us human. This is what connects us across time. This is what will continue, as long as we continue. The moon still turns. The pattern still holds. The story still unfolds. And you, lying here in the dark, listening to these words, are part of it. You always have been. You always will be. 28 marks on a bone. 40,000 years of watching the sky. And here you are, still watching, still wondering, still seeking to understand. The tradition continues. In you, through you, because of you. The marks remain. The pattern holds. The moon turns. And humanity, ancient and eternal, goes on. Sleep now. Let the wonder settle. Let the questions rest. Let yourself drift into dreams, knowing that you are part of something vast and ancient and ongoing. Something that began before you and will continue after you. Something that connects you to every human who has ever lived and ever will live. You are part of the pattern, part of the story, part of the long, unbroken thread of human consciousness reaching across time. And that is enough. That is everything. That is what it means to be human. The ancient calendars tell us this. And in listening, we remember. We remember who we are. We remember where we come from. We remember that we are part of something larger than ourselves. And in remembering, we honor them. The people who came before. The people who carved marks into bones and watched the moon and counted the days and knew, as we know, that time passes but the pattern remains. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this journey. Thank you for continuing the tradition. The marks remain. The pattern holds. The story continues. Forever. In the stillness now, there is only breath. The slow rise and fall of chest. The quiet rhythm of life continuing, moment by moment, heartbeat by heartbeat. And somewhere above, whether you can see it or not, the moon hangs in the sky, following its ancient path, indifferent to our attempts to measure it and yet somehow fundamental to them. It was there 40,000 years ago when someone carved the first marks. It is here now. It will be there 40,000 years from now, when others look up and wonder. This constancy is remarkable. In a world where everything changes, where civilizations rise and fall, where species go extinct and new ones emerge, where continents drift and climates shift and ice ages come and go, the moon remains. The cycle remains. The pattern remains. And so do we. Not as individuals, of course. We are mortal, fleeting, here for the briefest moment in cosmic terms. But as a species, as a collective consciousness, as a chain of knowledge and wonder and curiosity passing from generation to generation, we remain. We endure. We continue. The ancient calendars are proof of this continuity. They show us that what we do today, what we think about, what we value, is not new. It is the continuation of something ancient. Something that has been with us since before we had cities or writing or agriculture. Something fundamental to what we are. And perhaps this is the most comforting thing about the calendars. Not what they tell us about the past, though that is fascinating, but what they tell us about the future. If we have been doing this for 40,000 years, if the impulse to measure time and understand the cosmos has been with us for that long, then it will likely continue. We will likely continue. As long as there are humans, there will be people looking at the sky, counting, measuring, seeking to understand. This is not certain, of course. Nothing about the future is certain. We face challenges as a species that our ancestors did not. Climate change, nuclear weapons, artificial intelligence, technologies so powerful they could destroy us. And we cannot know whether we will navigate these challenges successfully or whether they will be our end. But if we do survive, if we continue, then the tradition will continue. People will still look at the moon, will still count, will still seek meaning in the patterns of existence. Because that is what we do. That is what we have always done. That is what makes us human. And even if we do not survive, even if something happens that ends human consciousness, that destroys our species or transforms it beyond recognition, the marks will remain. For a while anyway. The bones with their careful notches, the stones aligned to solstices, the evidence that once, on a small planet orbiting an ordinary star, there were beings who looked at the cosmos and tried to understand, who counted the moon, who measured time, who sought meaning. That evidence will remain until it, too, erodes, until the bones crumble to dust and the stones fall and the last traces of our existence disappear into the geological record. But for a while, for a long while by human standards, the marks will speak. They will say, we were here, we were conscious, we wondered. And if there is anyone, anything to read those marks, to decode that message, then in some sense we will have achieved immortality. Not personal immortality, but something else. The immortality of having existed, of having mattered, of having been part of the great unfolding of consciousness in the universe. This is perhaps the deepest meaning of the ancient calendars. They are not just records of time. They are records of consciousness. They are proof that minds like ours have existed for a very long time. That we are not anomalies, not accidents, not unique flukes. We are part of a continuum. We are the latest expression of something that has been developing, evolving, expressing itself for hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of years. The capacity to think, to wonder, to create, to understand. And that capacity, that consciousness is precious. It is valuable. It is, as far as we know, the only way the universe has of knowing itself. We are the cosmos made conscious. We are the means by which matter becomes aware of its own existence. And when we look at the moon, when we measure time, when we seek patterns and meaning, we are the universe looking at itself, studying itself, trying to understand itself. This is not mysticism. This is simply fact. We are made of stardust, literally. The atoms in our bodies were forged in the hearts of stars that died billions of years ago. We are the universe, rearranged into a form capable of consciousness. And that consciousness is not separate from the universe but part of it. A fundamental feature of reality, at least in this seasons return, that days lengthen and shorten, that the universe, for all its complexity, follows rules. And to find comfort in that, to find meaning in it, to be human is to create, to take knowledge and externalize it, to carve marks into bone, to paint images on cave walls, to write words, to build machines, to make the invisible visible, the abstract concrete, to leave something behind that says, I was here, I understood, I mattered, and to be human is to connect, to recognize that we are not alone, that others have felt what we feel, thought what we think, wondered what we wonder, that we are part of something larger than ourselves, something ancient and ongoing and precious. The ancient calendars embody all of these things. They are evidence of people existing in time, aware of time. They are evidence of pattern recognition, of systematic observation. They are evidence of creation, of the impulse to make knowledge physical. And they are evidence of connection, of knowledge passed down through generations, of a shared project that transcends the individual. In short, they are evidence of humanity, in its fullest form, and they have been for 40,000 years. This is what you inherit. This is what you are part of. Not just the specific tradition of calendar making, though that is part of it, but the broader tradition of being human, of living consciously in time, of seeking understanding, of creating and connecting and caring about what it all means. You inherit 40,000 years of wonder, 40,000 years of curiosity, 40,000 years of people looking at the sky and asking why. And you carry that forward, whether you know it or not, every time you think about the past, every time you plan for the future, every time you pause to notice the moon or mark the passage of seasons. You are the latest link in the chain, and one day you will pass it on. To children, perhaps, to students, to anyone who will listen. You will tell them stories, share knowledge, help them understand that they, too, are part of something vast and ancient and ongoing. And in doing so, you will ensure that the chain continues, that the tradition endures, that the pattern holds. This is your role, your purpose, your contribution to the long human project of existing consciously in time. And it is enough. It is more than enough. It is everything. So rest now. Let the weight of 40,000 years settle gently on your shoulders, not as a burden but as a comfort. You are not alone. You have never been alone. You are part of a vast human family that extends across all of time, and you are held by that family, supported by that tradition, connected to that chain. The marks on bones are your heritage. The counting of moons is your birthright. The long thread of human consciousness is your home. And the moon, faithful and constant, will continue to turn, will continue to cycle through its phases, will continue to mark time, whether you are there to count it or not. But you are there. You have been there in some form for 40,000 years, and you will continue to be there in some form for as long as humanity exists. This is the promise of the ancient calendars, that consciousness continues, that the pattern holds, that the story goes on. And you, in this moment, in this breath, in this slow drift toward sleep, are proof of that promise. You are the continuation, the inheritor, the link that connects past to future. You are the pattern made flesh. You are the story still being told. Rest now. Sleep. Dream of moons and marks and people watching the sky. Dream of connections across time. Dream of belonging to something vast and ancient and eternal. And know, as you drift away, that the tradition continues. In you, through you, because of you, the marks remain, the pattern holds, the moon turns, and humanity, ancient and eternal, goes on. Forever. There is a silence now that is complete. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of stillness. The kind of silence that exists in caves deep beneath the earth, where no light penetrates and time moves differently. Or the silence of the Ice Age tundra, vast and empty, broken only by wind. or the silence of a mind settling into sleep, thoughts finally ceasing their endless chatter, consciousness releasing its grip. In this silence, the marks on bones take on their full significance. They are not just data points, not just archaeological evidence. They are whispers, messages from people who lived in silence so profound we can barely imagine it. No traffic, no machinery, no constant hum of electricity, just wind and water and the sounds of animals and the crackling of fire. And in that silence, they watched the sky. They counted. They carved. What did that silence feel like? What was it like to live in a world so quiet that you could hear your own heartbeat, your own breath? Where the loudest sound might be thunder or falling water or the roar of a cave bear. Where human voices, when they came, were precious, important, carrying meaning that could not be recorded any other way. We cannot know, not really. Our world is too loud. Even in the quietest moments, there is sound. The hum of refrigerators, the distant rumble of traffic, the ever-present buzz of electronics. We have lost the kind of silence our ancestors knew. And in losing it, we have lost something else. The ability to hear the world in its raw form. The ability to listen deeply to the rhythms of nature. The ability to feel viscerally our place in the cosmos. But perhaps we can reclaim some of it. Perhaps, in moments like this, lying in the dark, letting go of the day, we can touch something close to that ancient silence. We can let the noise of the modern world fade. We can tune in to the slower, deeper rhythms. The breath, the heartbeat, the turning of the earth beneath us, the cycling of the moon above. This is what the ancient calendar makers were tuned into. They lived in that rhythm. They felt it in their bodies, in their lives, in the constant, undeniable presence of natural cycles. And they honored it by marking it down, by creating calendars that reflected what they observed, what they knew, what they felt. We can honor them by remembering, by taking time occasionally to step out of the noise and into the silence, to look at the moon, to notice the seasons, to feel the passage of time not as something mechanical and abstract, but as something real, something physical, something we are part of. This is not about rejecting modernity. It is not about abandoning technology or returning to some imagined primitive past. It is simply about balance, about remembering that we are biological beings, evolved over millions of years to respond to natural cycles, and that those cycles still matter, even if we have built a world that allows us to ignore them. The marks on bones remind us of this. They say, pay attention, watch the sky, notice the patterns. Remember that you are part of nature, not separate from it. Remember that time is not just a human construct, but a fundamental feature of the universe. And that by engaging with time, by measuring it, by understanding it, we connect with something ancient and eternal. This connection is available to anyone. It does not require special knowledge or tools. It does not require going to museums or reading scholarly papers, though those can help. It simply requires looking up. Watching, counting, noticing. Notice when the moon is full. Notice when it is new. Notice how it moves across the sky, how its position changes night by night. Notice when the days start getting longer. Notice when the first frost comes. Notice when the birds return in spring. Notice the patterns. And in noticing, you will be doing what humans have done for 40,000 years or more. You will be participating in the ancient tradition. You will be connecting with the cosmos. You will be, in the most literal sense, part of the pattern. This is what the ancient calendars teach us in the end. Not that we should count moons on bones, though we could if we wanted to, but that we should pay attention, that we should engage with the world, that we should remember we are part of something larger, and that remembering that connection is its own reward. It does not give us power or wealth or fame, but it gives us something else. Perspective, meaning, a sense of belonging, a sense that our lives, brief as they are, matter because they are part of a larger pattern, a larger story, a larger project that has been ongoing for as long as humans have existed and will continue as long as we continue. This is enough. This is more than enough. This is everything. So as you drift now, as consciousness fades and sleep approaches, let yourself feel that connection. Let yourself imagine the people who carved calendars into bone. Not as distant, primitive others, but as family, as ancestors, as fellow humans doing what humans do, watching the sky, counting, trying to understand. They are you. You are them, separated by time, but united by nature. And the knew that we were part of something larger. And you hear them. Across the vast gulf of time, you hear them. And in hearing, you answer, I am here. I am human. I watch the moon and count the days and know that I am part of something larger. The conversation continues. Across 40,000 years, the conversation continues. And it will continue as long as there are humans to carry it forward. The marks remain. The pattern holds. The moon turns. And you, in this final moment before sleep, are the bridge. The connection. The living proof that consciousness endures. That wonder endures. That humanity endures. Sleep now knowing this. Sleep and dream of moons and marks and people watching the sky. Dream of belonging. Dream of connection. Dream of the ancient pattern that holds us all. And when you wake, remember. Remember that you are part of something vast. Remember that you are not alone. Remember that 40,000 years ago, someone carved marks into a bone. And those marks, like you, like all of us, are still here, still speaking, still part of the pattern, forever.